Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of SlateAsia. It's been a minute, but today we've got two very special guests. I've got a co-host with me today, which is Nate, our CEO, and as always, we've got Jason from Sora Ventures. Guys, how are you doing right now?
Doing great, doing fantastic.
I say that because I'm going to bring it up, and because right now we are currently also looking at this. We're all hyped. It's just the start of 2024. We're expecting a Bitcoin ETF to get approved. And right now, Bitcoin is dumping hard. What do you guys think about this?
Just yesterday, Matrixport put out an article that said Bitcoin could hit 50K by the weekend. But today, surprisingly, they put out an article saying they expect the S to reject the ETF. So I think the market is reacting to that potential right now. But totally curious your thoughts, Jason.
Yeah, honestly, for us, it's not like we're selling regardless if it's going to 40K or not. Even if it's dropping like 35K, I think the point here is it'll only probably be a really good entry point for a lot of the long term investors. No, we're pretty bullish on Bitcoin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when you zoom out, we're still above 40K. This has been a massive, monumental sort of climb on this anticipation of the ETF. So I think there's an argument of it being overbought already at this point. As you say, I think you said offline just before, Jason, I think makes a lot of sense that a lot of people got into Bitcoin way before 40K. So say it's not exactly a point to be. I'm not terrified or scared right now that Bitcoin's at 41,000. I don't know what about you, Nate?
I think what's crazy is that the SEC, as we know, has had so many meetings with the different providers, and there's been so many amended filings. So for them to reject an ETF at this point would be a massive rug pull. And that would be very shocking to a lot of people since so many other experts had the ETF approval pegged above 90%.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
for sure.
honestly the way that I've looked at this is the longer it takes for the ETF to get approved, the more upside we have. Like this could be a correction where it will go even higher in weeks to come.
Let's go.
Sure.
Awesome.
100%.
So yeah, for everyone that's paying attention right now, this podcast is meant to focus on why ordinals will be a dominant theme of 2024. And I just got back from Taipei for a fantastic Sora summit where one of the most promising themes of the event was all the renaissance taking place on Bitcoin right now. Ordinals, BRC20, potential for runes in the future. So I really wanted to use this podcast as this opportunity to chat with Jason, who is an investor in CryptoSlate, and I know is going to increasingly be allocating to other projects building on top of Bitcoin. So, Jason, for people that are relatively new to Ordinals, can you explain what they are and why they're such a big deal?
Yeah. So this goes back. I'm sure a lot of people already have a pretty good understanding of what Ordinal does on a very high level. I'm gonna I'm gonna take a kind of a step back and look at more of the history of Bitcoin. Where if you go back to 2012, there was something called Color Coin, which in the early days people tried to build NFT like features on Bitcoin, but were not able to scale. But regardless, the existence of Color Coin gave birth to the initial rise of 721's NFTs in the early days of 2017 and 2018. But then something obviously sparked this narrative and that came back, right, which is the Ordinals from last year. And those who have been in the space long enough and knew that Bitcoin had been trying to build something like this, or they understand that this narrative is coming back. And so it's huge because the entire history of Bitcoin, there was this use case around speculation, mostly for traders and people who are speculating on digital asset. But never have we seen a breakthrough in the innovation where, look, we can actually build something on the Bitcoin blockchain. Um, Lightning aside, stacks aside, I think this is one of the most exciting parts where we, as even investors who've been investing in Ethereum and Solana and all these other ecosystem, see this entirely differently. And it will be a different route. Coin will walk into an entirely different route and will have entirely different themes compared to Ethereum. And there's so much like new things are going on right now. Incredible. Like we're learning like every day massively, and it's just so much stuff going on. But the narrative is obviously very strong because Bitcoin is by far the most secure blockchain in the world.
Leave you muted.
Sorry. So I've got a question regarding ordinals because I agree with everything that you said there, but I'm going to bring up a chart quickly because I think it's interesting to look at here. I think I need to go back to. So this is the mempool on Bitcoin and the size of the mempool over the last kind of like 7 years or so. And you can see that the mempool has always spiked during bull markets. So you can see on the left here, you've got the sort of 2017, 2018 bull run, and we've got the 2021 bull run. And now we're hopefully on the verge of a new bull run. And obviously, the price has gone up dramatically over the last year. But since the start of 2023, when Ordinals launched and started to gain traction, the mempool has grown in size constantly, and the price of transactions has also gone up. So the network is arguably becoming slower. Transactions are becoming more expensive. G One of the positive sign for this is it actually makes the network more secure, because even though there's a halving coming up this year, where the block reward's obviously going to get halved, the rewards for miners who also get paid in the fees for transactions is actually going to basically offset the block reward reduction. And miners are actually now getting increasingly profitable before the halving, because they're getting all these extra transaction fees, because people are having to spend more to get included in a block because the mempool is so full. So basically, the mempool's like bloated. There's too many transactions trying to go through, mostly because a lot of them are, say, images and text in ordinals. So it's filling up the size of it, which is 300 megabytes, I believe. And yeah, so as a result, you're having to pay more in order to get it through, meaning miners are compensated. So even after the rewards are halved, they're actually still going to be making more than people expected because of that. The flip side of it, so obviously that then incentivizes miners, and if this carries on and it grows, it could mean that even after the next 2 or 3 halvings going forward, where block rewards are way less, it will incentivize miners to carry on mining because they're getting all the fees. And that was one of always the hopes, is that the fees will keep miners wanting to secure the network, and also the fact that they want to keep the network going, et cetera, et cetera. The flip side is now, if you want to do a standard transaction with actual Bitcoin, not in Lightning, then it's like really expensive now. In a lot of cases, it's been more expensive than Ethereum. What are your thoughts around all of that? Obviously, there's pros and cons. It's not a right or wrong question, but I just love your thoughts, Jason, on the kind of the use case of Bitcoin with ordinals involved and cost of transactions.
Yeah, great question. I think you're absolutely on point in terms of Bitcoin being the most secure, and actually makes
Mhm.
it even more secure as fees goes up. The way that we look at this is, at the end of the day, it's all relative. In terms like fees being more expensive, it's all relative to Ethereum and Solana, right? But security is also relative. But the probability, the investment opportunity is also relative, right? So people are not stopping. They're not stopping. No one is actually, even though the fees are expensive, a lot more expensive than Ethereum, and because of the limitation of BRC20, the process of distributing tokens, even for yourself, it's incredibly expensive. But it's not stopping people from doing what they're supposed, like getting involved. And the reason for that is because there's so much upside in Ordinals. There's so much upside in terms of where this translates to, from we're just getting people excited. The way we look at this is that in every cycle of a bull run, there needs to be 2 things that occur. One is that a utility needs to be built, and then 2, utility drives speculation. And through that cycle, you get a very clear bull run. I think if you look at the early days of, like, back in 2016, 2017, Bitcoin, blockchain, Ethereum all struggled until what happened? Until ICO came around. Because that not only, no, before ICO, there was like utility, but then there was there was a missing piece, which is there was no speculation. And then when ICO came around, speculation occurred and people decided to invest. And at that time, people were still complaining about how expensive it is. Looking back now, it's really cheap compared to inscriptions today. Ethereum fees back then were like super cheap compared to inscriptions today. But now it's like, it's all over again, right? So that's why people are super excited about it. And it's not just the funds who are excited. In fact, this is the time where, like, things around our investment world in Web3 have flipped for the first time. What I mean by that is, historically, it's always the VC that invests first. It's always the VC that get a piece of the deal first. And for example, like, we invest into a Solana project and it gets listed, and then the retailers buy it, right? That's like the traditional VC route as well in Web2. This is the first time where the entire logic has flipped, where retailers are the ones who are minting it first. Retailers are the one who are coming in before the VC does. Retailers are the one who gets to basically have a dominant position in the allocation before their VC does. And that is very different from what we've seen in the Ethereum Solana space. And this kind of goes back to the early days where, oh, finance should be decentralized. We shouldn't be like the entire speculation narrative around Web3 should not be centralized by all these major VCs, right? And we're seeing that right now happening, where it's like inscriptions are disrupting the entire model. We as a VC fund at one point was like, wait, we are here just to invest in equity company, but there's no equity companies to invest in Bitcoin, especially the last 6 months ago. Like, it's either you're in the inscriptions, you mint it yourself, or you're not involved at all, or you're buying from the second. How many VC funds are involved with this? So it's like the game has completely changed. The narrative has completely flipped. And for the first time, we're seeing like community is overcoming. They're overwhelmed by this narrative, and they're seeing that this is the first time we get to have so much the risk here is much lower than investing in any secondary project that's listed on a centralized exchange. So yeah, things are becoming different, but at the same time, this is one of those things that I think would call for a new narrative for justifying why we're going to be heading to a bull market soon.
Do you not think that there's going to be a need for a layer 2 for inscriptions in future as a result of
Yeah, great
this, given
question.
that like the peak mempool size was really around 200 megabytes per byte per vbyte in 2021. We're already pretty much double that now, and inscriptions are still in the early stages in a lot of ways. We've not got, say, global mass adoption. Like, if we were to get serious adoption with them, then is Bitcoin really made for it? And then the reason why I just wanted to add on to that was, but then there is obviously that part of securing the network. If you move it to a layer 2, then the miners aren't getting the fees in the same way. Yeah, how do you feel about layer 2s for ordinals or inscriptions?
Yeah, so a lot of people like obviously ask the same question: is there a need for a layer two? And I think most people would agree that there just needs to be a layer two. Unfortunately, I see this differently. I wouldn't say that. I think Bitcoin delivers a different narrative and a different output compared to Ethereum or Solana. If you're trying to build something and you actually want scalability, like speed and low fees, why are you building on Bitcoin? That's the first
Mhm.
question I ask. It's like, you as a project and you as a developer, if you really value those things more than anything else, like the world is fair. Even not just like we don't even have to talk about Web3. The world is in a very fair in the sense that if you're talking just like purely on encryption level, in the world of encryption, if you want security, you're always losing scalability and efficiency. Like, that's just how the
Mhm.
world works in technology, right? You want something that's secure, like more secure, then you're gonna that takes speed to make it even more secure. So you're sacrificing something for other things. And so here, if you believe that Solana and Ethereum is fast enough, and you value more about like speed and fees, then you shouldn't be building on Bitcoin. That's the first thing. That's kind of the first argument I'm
So,
seeing.
so you're talking there around, and I think it's a really interesting point of you wouldn't, because usually the response to this is Bitcoin a hard asset and you hold it and that's what it's there for, and essentially it's just people wanting to say that it's the people that just want to pump their bags in a lot of ways and just want Bitcoin number go up. Well, you're really interested there saying like the slower it becomes, arguably the more secure it becomes. So would you be happy with like a Bitcoin network that almost grinds to a halt in terms of its speed, but is as a result super secure, and therefore that's the value of it? Is that what you're saying?
Having this has been the case for the last 10 years, 10 plus years. Nothing has changed. So it's like you asking, okay, do you think this is, do you think we should have a Bitcoin where it's faster than Ethereum? I'm like, why is that even the point here, right? Bitcoin has been running slower than Ethereum for the last 10 plus years, and people are perfectly fine with it. If this was really the issue, like, why hasn't the market react that way? Like, why isn't Ethereum surpassing Bitcoin? Right. So
Mm.
I think the point here is that with any form, let's take a step back again, like just speaking very broadly, if
Mhm.
if I want to try to build the world's largest database in the world, I think I'll probably value security over everything else first. And then after that, I can talk about like relative speed. Again, the question here is relative. Like, the key point here is relative. Everything is relative here. The reason why I don't necessarily
Hmm.
agree, and I think people would obviously disagree with me because there are so much money being poured into these layer 2 projects that kind of hug the Bitcoin narrative. But if you look at the history of these layer 2 projects, like before Ordinals came out, like they were not doing well at all. Most of these
Yeah.
projects, without the Ordinals like narrative, most of these projects would have died easily.
Oh
And they
yeah,
would have had
to
this.
me, it'd have to be a ordinals, like an inscription first layer 2. I don't think you can make an existing layer 2 work for inscriptions. It has to be something
Yeah.
that just bundles inscription
Um,
native.
yeah. So the market right now is so early. So if you're talking about like within the next 2 years, I don't think there will be any form of like layer 2 anytime soon. And the reason for that is because the market is efficient in the sense that there's so much stuff that needs to be built around Bitcoin first. Like Bitcoin is basically it's like it's not just Ordinals, it's the entire UTXO. I think that's a thing that's
Mhm.
very obvious, very unique about Bitcoin that's different from Ethereum. Whereas Ethereum historically is okay, the Ethereum narrative is done. Now let's talk about Solana, which is people are saying, oh, it's the layer 2 of Ethereum. It's the faster, better version of Ethereum. But you look at Bitcoin, it's like whatever you can do on Bitcoin, whatever you can do on Ordinals today, on BRC20 today, you can repeat that on tap. And there's all these layers that's being built in parallel with BRC20. And for example, like BRC20, amazing innovation that basically made everyone easy to get involved. The problem is it's also because it's too simple, it's overly simplified, and then it lacks functionality. And so then you have like tap coming in, which enables airdrop, which enables some element of Ethereum, for example, like they can enable staking. They're 5 times cheaper than BRC20. They can enable distribution better. So if you're a project in the past, you either mint everything yourself and then try to distribute internally, or you have to basically deploy the inscription and then mint everything manually yourself. So like then obviously that costs a lot of money, right? And because the optics is so clear today, so that it's really even risky for you to be trying to mint 50% of it, because by the time you mint like 20%, other people would have spawned it and start minting it in front of you. So it's like this really difficult process for projects and for just in general, people who are trying to build utility part of the fungible tokens on Ordinals, and like incredibly hard to distribute tokens. And so from their perspective, they're looking for solutions that it's an improved version of a BRC. And there's going to be several competitors of that showing up in the next couple of years. And just that narrative, there's so much stuff to be built on. And then after that part is done, like let's say that it gets super oversaturated, right? And the fees goes up like crazy and then things doesn't make sense anymore. We're also forgetting there's like something under E2XO, which is like there's Dogecoin, there's Litecoin, there's all these like UTXO chains that you can build again. And then under those chains, you can have like Dogecoin today, have Dogeno. And then from there, you can even have tap on Dogecoin. And the narrative, it's so large. It's like much larger than Ethereum. I think like people are just, who think that it's all about L2. You're basically asking a kid to fly before the kid can even walk. So it's just let the market run on its own. The market right now is performing fine. If people are really complaining about fees, like look at the meme pools. Why is it going up? If the issue is really about fees, why are other data not showing that? Why are the trends not showing that? Right. So whereas I think VCs are all like trying to just build that L2 narrative because that's what VCs do. But from our perspective, it's like we should be thinking from a very logical perspective. We shouldn't just move narrative from Ethereum because Bitcoin is not Ethereum. We shouldn't just move the narrative over assuming that works because it worked on other chains. No, Bitcoin is unique. Bitcoin is going to walk its own road. It's never going to copy the same route as Ethereum. And that's why we're excited about Bitcoin, about Ordinals, because it's different. And people who assume that things will happen exactly the same way on Bitcoin, they're just like naive about like where like things are not like happening this way. The data shows itself, or you just pull a draft, the numbers out. It's not stopping, and the numbers will go even higher in the next coming months. It's so exciting. Like there's this one company and they decided to launch the runes alpha.xyz. And people are like assuming that it's had to do with runes. But if you've been following Sora Summit, where Casey did the announcement of runes, you'll know that it's coming out during the halving. even for us, there's wow, like it's so obvious. It's just so obvious that it's not Casey's project. But even that, people are just like getting involved and minting stuff there, and it's insane. So like clearly, the market is in a phase where it's like the early days of the ICO craze in 2017.
Do you think
So
that, yeah, I'll jump in real quick. Do you think that all of the utility that has been taking place on Ethereum, is it logical to assume that will also be copied onto Bitcoin? And if so, is really the argument that it's a more secure network, not, as we talked about, not for the speed or the low cost of the transactions?
I think at the end of the day, there will be obviously eventually there will be some elements of what we see in Ethereum on Bitcoin, but the idea here is not to rush it. I think the like Ordinals is so early. I really don't like when like other people come to me and be like, hey, why don't you invest in this L2 project? Or it isn't L2 in a very obvious narrative. The way I look at it is, do you not see what there's just so many issues on Bitcoin right now? Why don't you solve those issues first? Like, why are you jumping ahead and then going for L2s? Now that will eventually come, but then it's like the problem right now is you got to fix the most basic thing. Like you basically want to drive it, you want to build a Tesla, but you don't even have a car yet. So that for us, it's more about building what's obvious today, solving it, backing projects that solving like really simple stuff. Like so simple, like you might be like, okay, wow, wait, isn't this like pretty obvious? I'm like, yes, but it's Bitcoin is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not Ethereum, right? Like we're going back to square one basically, and then we have to rebuild everything. But that takes money, that takes time, and only when you build a very strong, robust infrastructure, then what can we talk about layer twos? Then we talk about scalability. Right? Anyone who's done coding before will probably say the same thing, which you can have the same set of codes. So you can have the same set of products on the outside. It looks exactly the same, but the code base is completely different. Like one could be written like poorly so that it's impossible to scale. And one could be written like really well with really well documented, and other people can build on top of it. So from my perspective, it's the VCs are only getting involved with Bitcoin layer 2 because like that, they think it's money grab. They think like this is like the quick buck, the quick narrative, the no brainer narrative. But from my perspective, it's like, I really hope there are more like common sense people out there who just look at, just sit down and just look what's going on in the industry and just see what's around you and try to solve like the most fundamental problems first. Because only when you solve these fundamental building blocks and you try to like you work a way to be building a very robust infrastructure, can you build a longer milestone, build a much more robust infrastructure in the future. And even for us, we see a very clear difference between the Bitcoin investors like us and versus the non-Bitcoin investors who are just in it for the money grab.
So you're completely done with, and maybe you never had this narrative, but the idea of Bitcoin as digital cash to spend day to day, that's completely outside of your narrative. Now you're in the kind of the security, the securing assets for the long term in a digital future sort of aspect of Bitcoin.
That is still the case, but it's within the within the Bitcoin ecosystem. If you trade anything on Unisat today, you need Bitcoin. So it's still the dominant. It's like going back to like even earlier than 2017. If anyone was involved, and I don't know who follows this from since 2014, sorry, 2016, but if you remember the early days of ICO, it was all in Bitcoin. It was all in
Namecoin was the
Bitcoin.
first ICO, right?
Yeah, like Mycelium wallets, they did their ICO. It was on Bitcoin. The first ICOs in the early day was all in Bitcoin. And then it was Ether. And then it was like stablecoin. And now we're back to Bitcoin. So actually this entire process makes Bitcoin even like the narrative of Bitcoin as a digital cash or digital like medium of exchange, more of that. Like more, it becomes utility of that has increased a lot because of restrictions. Because obviously people are minting this and they see the upside in this token and they see the upside of these Ordinals, they see the upside of these projects and they get involved early. And so from their perspective, they're happy with making Bitcoin, using Bitcoin to make more Bitcoin because everyone assumes that Bitcoin will go to 100K or 200K in this year. Yeah. So actually everything makes Bitcoin more of digital cash, if anything.
What do you say to some of the Bitcoin maximalists? Like yesterday we had famous OG Bitcoin developer Jimmy Song, he comparing Ordinals to pump and dumps and shit coins. Like, Is this really just the evolving narrative and we need to not think about Bitcoin as from the original white paper anymore?
Yeah, look, I think there's always going to be like like if you look at just the history of Bitcoin, right? There's just been so political. There's just been so many different philosophy of Bitcoin, like throughout these like 10 plus years. It will probably remain that way for the next 10 plus years. And I'm not here to pick sides. I'm always neutral, right? But I do see that what Ordinals have done that is very quite unique and shocking to me is that it's actually brought in a lot of the Bitcoin projects together. And I'm referring to like Rootstock, BSV, Stacks. They never talk to each other. And some of the Bitcoin, like BSV Maxi would be like, what is Stacks? And some of the Stacks people would be like, what is BSV? But then you've seen people from BSV coming back to Ordinals coming back to Bitcoin and building on Ordinals. You've seen a lot of Stacks people coming to Ordinals, fundraising, building on Ordinals. If anything, I think Ordinals have brought more people within the greater Bitcoin ecosystem together than split people apart. But then in the process of doing that, that's going to take time, right? And there's still going to be Bitcoin maxis out there who believe their initial philosophy of what Bitcoin is, and that's going to be perfectly fine because there's this part of Web3 mandate is that there is a vision and there is a philosophy, usually unexplained. Leave it to your community to decide on what that is. But usually that vision is really what drives community together, right? The common interests, right? If you went back to 8, 7, 9 years ago, there were so many forms of definition of what a blockchain is, right? People were referring blockchain to several forms of philosophy, right? And that's perfectly fine. That's just the nature of like the industry we're in, right? And it's good to have people who bring out that narrative, right? Because this industry is borderless, and there's going to be different forms of culture. There's going to be different forms of thinking, but it's these thinking that drove the initial innovation around our industry, and it continues to drive innovation, right? And this is why we have this forks. We've been following Unisat yesterday. There's like different thinking of like how BRC20 should be developed in the next couple of months. So very interesting that there's different ways of thinking around Bitcoin, but I'm not in a position where I feel like I'm picking sides because if you do that, then you're actually limiting your innovation and limiting the possibility of Bitcoin. In fact, not just Bitcoin. I'll probably agree that it's limiting any form of layer ones out there, Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, whatever. We try to be very supportive and we try to see what's happening. But the most important part from our side is we're also very open and willing to learn. Like we never see ourselves, even though, yes, we made several investments in Bitcoin and continue to do that. We're not in a position where we're like, oh, we're Bitcoin experts. We're not. We never say that we're Ordinals experts. We're not. Anyone that have worked with me will probably agree that I will always encourage people to be humble because our industry is always changing. The philosophy is always changing. The way people think is always changing. And the best way to be in this industry is to just really enjoy and respect people's like thoughts and just see how things go.
Do you have any like internal way of estimating what the potential would be for a fork or even potentially a patch?
I think it's possible. I don't want to speculate too much on this. We are investors in the Unisat as well. Yeah. But I think from my perspective, again, I think people are going to want innovation and improvement because this usually drives some form of speculation and improvement, potential improvements. But I think what's interesting, it's like whatever happens, they always come back. If you know what I mean, like even like with all these forks that we've seen in Bitcoin, it always comes back. The market is very efficient. The market is way more efficient. Obviously, when on traders' terms, when they say it's efficient, everything's priced in. The same thing actually with data on Bitcoin. On data on blockchain, everything is priced in.
Fascinating. Is there anything else you want to go through on Ordinals? I know we've got to about half an hour here, so it's a good length. Ultimately, I think one thing I'd like to ask, regardless before we go, but just have a think about that, Nate, is what are your favorite Ordinals projects in terms of utility, things that you think that are bringing something that just doesn't exist and can't exist outside of Bitcoin?
That question for Nate, right?
No, sorry for you. Sorry, Jason.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. I'll probably say the most obvious one is on-chain monkey. It is the most obvious. Like when everyone comes to our office in Ventures, the most simple way to describe what Ordinals is that it is an upgraded version or what we call NFT 2.0. Where historically when like Bored Apes and Azukis, they're really, in my opinion, they're more like the proof of concept that NFTs have value and can create communities. But if you look at the actual technology, most of these NFTs, I say most of it because there are Ethereum on-chain projects with like on-chain asset. I'm saying, but majority of it are in the form of a URL or string that is linked to either a centralized server or a decentralized server, where like the IPFS, right? So, but I think a lot of people don't understand how important it is for if you're involved with Web3, that whatever you touch and you invest or end up buying should have the full properties of blockchain. Unfortunately, I think at this point, people don't really care too much because the value of the IP is far greater than the actual digital asset for like Azukis and Bored Apes. But it doesn't mean that there aren't people like Ornos, like on-chain monkey, where they do value on-chain properties. Like everything that we've seen from on-chain monkey, they try to basically build on Ethereum. Now they're able to migrate everything on Ornos. And it's like in my opinion, the most easy to understand case study out there to why people have even initially considered Ordinals over the Ethereum blockchain or over the Solana blockchain. Yeah. So everything
And if you're going to bet
on-chain
on a
monkey is,
blockchain to still, sorry, Jason.
yeah. And if you've been like following with just on-chain monkey in general, they've actually worked with Bugatti to launch, they call it the Bugatti A, which is Bugatti basically launching their first set of Ordinals a couple of months ago. And that is also like very interesting for anyone who's been following real world assets and just like the consumer product side. Like, why would Bugatti choose Bitcoin over Ethereum? And I think from like, obviously I can't represent Bugatti, but I think the most logical way to think about this is that if you are building the most legit brand in the world in whatever industry you're in, the only thing you really care about is the best, and that's the only thing you do as a company, then Bitcoin is a no-brainer. Your choice for on Web3. And so even from a consumer perspective in traditional non-crypto world, companies will evaluate Bitcoin not because it's more expensive or less expensive or it's faster or slower, but because it's the most secure. It is the best, the most secure, right? And so that is good enough for most people to justify why they want to use Ordinals over Ethereum.
And what I was going to say was, if you're going to bet on a blockchain to still exist in 100 years, you're going to be betting on Bitcoin over any others, aren't you? And that's where you want your NFTs to be.
The answer is it depends, right? So fundamentally, if I'm still building something that requires a lot of speed, then maybe where I do feel that if my users end up wanting speed and low fees over like security, then no, I wouldn't say I would bet on Bitcoin because I think Bitcoin will only get more and more expensive.
Yeah, but what I mean is Bitcoin has the best chance of still existing in a long time. Is what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, sure.
If you want an asset, you want it to still exist in 50 years, put it on Bitcoin.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. So I think a lot of people will start to look at like blockchain and Bitcoin blockchain in general as basically the world's largest database. Like it's not going to be like, I think this is a pretty far, we're probably still several years away from this, making this true. But the way I look at this is that, you look at 20 years ago, there's the concept of big data, right? And then like 5 years ago, there's a concept of AI. And now what's hot is Web3. The Bitcoin ETF from a very broad perspective, people are speculating that it's going to benefit Bitcoin. But from a VC perspective, I see this as an opportunity for not just people to speculate on Bitcoin. I think it is the traditional capital markets getting involved with Web3. An approval on the Bitcoin ETF is not an approval just on Bitcoin, the digital asset itself, but it's an approval on the entire Web3 industry. It means Web2 venture capital firms, Web2 private equity firms, Web2 institutions will start to explore investing on other sectors within the Web3 space. And this makes a lot of sense because 20 years ago, people have been talking about big data. They've been talking about scalability on data. They're talking about like the usability of data, and everything have been around this AI narrative. But little do people know that there is a roof to how much data you can scale. And that really depends on how much data you have you're utilizing. For example, Tencent data is never going to be shared with Google data, and vice versa. But then if the data is actually on chain, it's open, right? So that infrastructure is much more powerful. And when you build products, when you build around AI, you're going to want AI to be as smart as possible, to be at the optimal state. And in order to achieve that, you need to have basically be utilizing the world's largest data layer. Unfortunately, I do think that's going to be on some form of decentralized data layer. It would not be on a centralized server.
For sure. For sure. Agreed. Nate, anything else you want to go through before we wrap this up?
No, I thought that was fascinating. Yeah, I really appreciate all your insights, Jason. I'm bullish on Ordinals and what's happening on Bitcoin. And I know it's been quite controversial over the past year or so, but I think ultimately that controversy is good because it creates discussion and it creates more opportunity for really the Bitcoin ecosystem to unite, like you were saying earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. It's insane. I rarely feel so bullish about a narrative. Obviously, the way I look at it is just insane. I think it's insane. I think this next entire bull run, people are speculating that Bitcoin will be worth X amount of dollar. I think, yes, there's going to be element of the Bitcoin ETF being approved, leading to more demand. But I really do believe that the fundamental value is more important than the speculation. But I do think you're able to build on Bitcoin and you utilize the Bitcoin layer for real world use case or for building stuff around Web3 will significantly improve, will be the ultimate reason why Bitcoin will be worth way more than what's worth previously.
Fantastic. Right. Thank you very much for joining us as always, Jason. And thanks for co-hosting, Nate. It was an absolute pleasure. So for this episode of SlateAsia, guys, thank you much for joining us. Like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. And we'll see you next time.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
Cheers.